Hi y'all are. I'm glad for you to see me today, I guarantee. This is Paul Hood, the Cajun Counselor, with another episode of my podcast, The Cajun Counselor. Laissez le bon temps rouler. Hi y'all are. Paul Hood, the Cajun Counselor, here with another episode of my podcast, The Cajun Counselor. Today, we're going to cover several topics. First, I wanted to offer a few words to our friends in Oxford, Mississippi, the Ole Miss Rebels. And I realize that many of y'all are upset that Lane Kiffin left the school. And to be honest with you, Lane Kiffin is the first coach since Johnny Vaught at Ole Miss who won legitimately. You've had a couple of coaches, and you haven't had much success since 1960. I mean, let's face it. You had a couple of coaches, Billy Brewer and Hugh Freeze, who won. And in a minute y'all started winning, we knew you were cheating. And the NCAA would confirm it each time. But here's the deal. The LSU job, it might not be the number one job, but it's certainly in the top three. And the Ole Miss job, I think Lane might have gotten it into the top 25 for the first time in decades. Y'all are probably legitimately a 30 or 40, top 30 or 40 job. You're not going to win a national championship in Oxford. Lane Kiffin was the best hope, but I didn't see that team as being a team that could beat Ohio State or probably not even Indiana. So, but note that while you didn't let Kiffin coach the playoffs because you thought it would be the enemy, you did allow him to loan you back your offensive coordinator for the playoffs, which I thought was rather magnanimous of LSU after the way y'all treated Kiffin. And I realize that Lane Kiffin is no saint. And to be honest with you, very few that I have met at that level, with the exception of Nick Saban, actually is a saint. Nick Saban is a very morally driven guy, and he's always going to be that way. But some of these guys, they'll go with the flow, even if it breaks the rules. But I think realistically, you're headed back for maybe the Egg Bowl being the difference between whether you're bowl eligible or not. So note that Tulane, who lost their coach to the University of Florida, adopted a different approach, the collaborative approach. They allowed Coach Sumrall because his team has a chance of getting in the playoffs too, just like Ole Miss. In this day and age, unfortunately, there are no more career loyalties. And the idea of you're either with us or against us is just gone. Somebody who you lost last year to NIL, you might get back the next year. And coach is the same way. So, the problem with this transfer is an NCAA football problem. This doesn't happen in the NFL. And to be honest with you, Kiffin was in a damn if you do or don't situation. And it's unfair. It was unfair to him. But most of all, and I think Coach Saban said this best, it's unfair to the players who look to him. Now, we heard, everybody's upset, wanted him to go, probably been pepped up. In my experience, and I watched it happen at LSU, we hired a coach once, really at the insistence of the players. And to be honest with you, it was a mistake. And I've never seen the players lack the maturity, the age, the discretion and discernment that comes with maturity and age. The players get pepped up on emotions and it's rah-rah and they want their guy. But rarely is their guy the right guy. I mean, and I base this over watching this for 40 years. So players are never a good barometer or an accurate barometer, because I'm going to promise you this. On January 2nd, when the transfer portal opens, Coach Kiffin is probably going to go to Oxford, and with the NIL money that LSU gave him, is probably going to buy 6 or 7 of your best players. And that's going to happen to you, whether you want it to happen or not. So with that, I wish Ole Miss the best. I'm going to pull for the SEC no matter what. I do believe in the conference, and it just means more in the SEC. All right, second topic. And this is something that I came upon when I was asked to do a program, a follow-up program about a very, very technical tax technique that I used to use a lot, predominantly, with my ultra-wealthy clients. And it's called a charitable lead annuity trust. And basically, it's a pretty simple thing. You put money in, you can do it during lifetime or at death, and for a certain term of years, a charity gets a percentage. You set it. For mine in the formulas, I don't recall ever creating a charitable lead trust that had a payout larger than maybe 2.5% or 3%. That was about it. And then at the end of the term, all the growth goes, and usually it goes back to, most of these are done in a will or in a document that's effective at death. So it's not going back to the person who originally created it. Well, for people who had a state tax liability, but who either lacked the ability or the interest to get life insurance, and they had, a lot of paper wealth, wealth tied up in land and closely held businesses, and in other words, stuff that's not liquid, like cash or marketable securities, bonds that can be sold and liquidated in 72 hours, the 3-day rule. So they were looking for a way to reduce or even eliminate their federal estate tax liability. In the testamentary formula charitable lead annuity trust, I did a whole program several years ago about that. But as the estate tax, because the first time I did that program, it was pre-Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, so the exemption, affectionately referred to it as, which is what it was when I started, but it's really the applicable exclusion amount. And that's the amount that's exempt right now. It's $13,990,000. OBA, effective January 1, 2026, jumps it to $15 million per person. So you'd say, okay, well, the charitable lead trust really doesn't have much allure for, almost none of us who have a federal estate tax liability. Well, here's my epiphany, okay? And I did this program, and I'm like, wait, normally for people of less, more moderate wealth, they get talked to about a charitable remainder trust, which I always viewed as an income tax deferral device. I never regarded it as an estate tax minimization technique unless the person, or it was a couple, had no children. And they had no natural bounty. So they pick a charity or, retain the right to change it to another, qualified charity. But and if you set it up during lifetime, at the end of the term, if it had a term, because if it has, it caps at 20 years, which is not true for a charitable lead trust. Another difference between the lead and the remainder is that the lead trust generally is taxable. It is a taxable trust. You can create a version during lifetime where all of the income gain, loss deduction, and credit attributable to property in the lead are put on the grantor's individual 1040, their income tax return. It's called a grantor trust. And only gifts to grantor trusts get an income tax deduction, but the penalty is you pay going back or going forward on all the trust's income. So you get that. You have that. But at the end of the remainder trust, which is tax exempt, at least initially, all that property goes to the charity. And for people of modest wealth, normally their family's their biggest charity. So I got to thinking about it, and I said, you know what? Yeah, the TCLAT may be not going to be used much for, people, because almost nobody owes the estate tax now. But I said, this might be a great tool for people who have modest wealth, but who are charitable. And they don't view themselves as philanthropists. But guess what? They have the philanthropic spirit and heart. And that's all you need. And we need to, I believe more people would do this. I'll tell you this. From my standpoint, I'd like to have all of the subspecialties of estate planning have what I call a circle the wagons for your community, public service information, and an absolutely a marketing blitz on not just giving, but how to give this way. Because in a lead trust, now one of the downsides to it is if the charity's getting all the income, the family's got to go without. Now, that doesn't matter to a lot of people who have adult children who are independent. But that is a side effect of it. But here's the deal. You can set that percentage. It might be 1%. And that's 1% of the value of the trust on creation. Now, there's another kind where you have to have it valued every year, but you better make sure you don't have assets that require an independent appraisal, or you've just basically given the appraiser an annuity for the length of the trust. Because they got to come in and value it every year to determine the fair market value to multiply by the percentage to pay it out to either the income beneficiary in a remainder trust or the charity in a lead. So you can set it that way. Normally people can get around, they can make other arrangements. And just think of all the extra money that would be given for good causes. We've been giving these people the wrong tool. For those who are income tax motivated, they're sitting on an appreciated, something that's going to trigger a lot of capital gain if they sell it. And they'd like to sell it, but they don't want to take the capital gains hit. That is a technique for the remainder trust. But it's a lousy estate transfer technique unless your desired transferee is the charity. So, from my standpoint, and I've written about this, I'm going to blog more about this. I think it's something that we ought to all give some thought to. Now, I have been promising people, and I've been saving up, because eventually on Lineberg, we're going to do this. I wanted to start reviewing books. And I promise you right now, I have about 20. But these were some of the earliest ones, and I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about each one. The first one is a lady who actually, she sought my assistance when she was writing the book, and I actually gave her some pointers and some suggestions that she took for the book. And Kaylin is performing what I believe is a really, really needed service out there. In my opinion, the prenuptial agreement, and my dear friend and former co-author and collaborator, Emily Bouchard, we did sessions years ago on what we called the purposeful prenup. And we view the prenuptial agreement process as a great way for couples to get to know each other financially, because let's face it, the number one reason for divorce is differences in financial views and how you view and spend money. But unfortunately, a lot of lawyers see it as a zero-sum game, and that is misguided. But one of the services that Kaylin performs, and I think it's really great, is she actually can assist these couples to communicate. Because let's face it, the more communication, the more positive communication, and you don't want to start every sentence with you, but then you also don't want to should on yourself either. But getting to know each other and creating a safe space to get to know each other, because guess what? If they get to know each other, they either A, won't marry because they find that they're incompatible long term, or B, they deepen their relationship. But you got to have the right representation. And Prenup Partnership is a really, really wonderful book on this really cutting edge subject. All right, the second book is written by a husband and wife. And while I don't think I've had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Claudia Tordini, I've known Richard Franklin for a long time. And they are really on what I would call a crusade, and none of the crusades were well intentioned. I teach courses on the history of the papacy and the popes, and I've threatened to teach a course on the crusades. They were ill-advised. Pope Urban II made a mistake at Clermont back in 1095, calling for them, and because we were never going to send enough people over there to repopulate it, and that was just, we were outnumbered as the kings left. But Claudia and Richard have written the book Family, Wealth, Inheritance, and Well-Being. And well-being is a great term. Unfortunately, Delaware passed a pretty worthless, and I think they acknowledge it now, well-being statute. And I really tore it apart in a couple of articles. And my criticisms were really well-founded. It just wasn't very well thought out. But true well-being is a laudable goal in estate planning. We want to produce a stronger well-being for people. Now, the third book, and Kathy Carroll came out of a family business, and her book, Hug of War. Kathy is a really gifted speaker. She is one of the most poised people I've ever seen. Just an amazing lady. And I love her title, Hug of War, How to Lead a Family Business with Both Love and Logic. And I'm going to tell you right now, Kathy Carroll is capable of doing it. Her book is fantastic. And I'm definitely going to, I encourage y'all to take a look at that one. The last one is a really neat guy. Besides being an inch taller than me, Mark Schiller wrote a book, and the cover of it I want to show you. How Not to Ruin Your Kids with Money. And it's a kid with his sunglasses, with his hair up and holding cash. He's a stand-up comic. And Mark, I have only seen snippets of some of his performances. And he's right. I'm going to read from the back cover. Even those with a modest amount of wealth can find themselves laying awake at night, worrying that the wealth they might actually have jeopardize the well-being of their children and grandchildren. There must be a way to address those fears and set things up for a positive transfer of wealth, right? And Mark is, of course, right. For the last 30 years, I have been like John the Baptist, crying out in the wilderness about the human side of estate planning. And more and more, it's really encouraging to see people like Mark, as that's his, he's a lawyer. Kathy Carroll came out of a family business, and she has some of the scars of it that she uses to positively influence others. So that is a really, really fabulous thing. All right, I'm going to go with one more story. I had 3 others, but I'm trying to be mindful of the time. But this is one that really, and it's this time of year, I think it's most apropos. When I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to read this, which is what I posted about. It was in response. It was in my hometown of Alexandria, Louisiana, and a state representative had posted a picture of him ringing the Salvation Army bell with a picture of his mother. It was a memory because it was from 2018, but since then his mother had passed away. And it was emotionally, it flooded me. because I rang that bell. And let me read this, and I just get emotional about it. One of my favorite volunteer duties was ringing that bell. The Salvation Army basketball gym in Alexandria on Beauregard Street was a safe haven for my poor dad in the 40s. I remember him taking me for me to play in a game there when I was like in 4th grade. And I think, I don't remember 100% for certain, but I think this was the actual first real basketball game that I ever played in, because at Cabrini, the basketball began in 5th grade. And like I said, I was either in 3rd or 4th. And I don't remember why we played this game, but we did. And I said, and despite Dad's quiet nature and my young age, I was a deep empath even then, without even knowing what it was, which I wouldn't until I was in my 20s. But I have carried the pain of a lot of people for a long time. It's probably my greatest trait and probably my biggest source of personal pain. But I said, I could palpably feel Dad's emotions, even though he couldn't show them. On re-entering that place that had brought him peace during chaotic times at home, I remember him pausing and looking around right before we exited the building. I'm not sure that he ever made it back into that building. But when Ma Lynn asked me to write Dad's obituary, when he died in 2016, January, the one thing I knew, seared indelibly in my brain, back from 4th grade, was that all memorial gifts were to be made to the Salvation Army to continue to provide a safe haven for youth like my dad in that magical gym. It was the only time I was ever in that building. I doubt it's still there. But at Menard, my high school for Key Club, we had shifts. And I never rang that bell for fewer than 20 hours in any Christmas season. Until next time, love your people. Au revoir. And that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Cajun Counselor. This is Paul Hood saying, laissez le bon temps rouler. Au revoir.